This is Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara, and today my guest is Premier Caroline Cochrane, Premier of the Northwest Territories. Hello, Premier Cochrane.
Good morning, Sarah.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Excited to be here.
I'm excited to be speaking with you. So before we get started, as I start every podcast in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important for me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, Stoney Dakota Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. And before we just started recording, I said, no one else can see this, but I was pointing out that I think I can see trees from Premier Cochrane's desk. And she said that there's actually a lake, which I don't think that there's any other legislature that has lake access. So maybe that's something very unique to the Northwest Territories. So before we get started, so in case you didn't already know, so Premier Cochrane, you were first elected in 2015, representing Range Lake. You are currently the second female premier of the Northwest Territories. You are currently one of three female premiers in Canada. So Heather Stephenson, yourself, and now Danielle Smith in Alberta. And you became premier in 2019 on the third ballot. So we'll get into this, but in a completely different system of government in the Northwest Territories, you won on the third ballot, defeating three other candidates. And you wear many, many, many hats besides premier, but we'll also get into that. So I just wanted to say again, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you again.
Yeah. So I'm really curious about your journey into politics, because from what I've read, and it wasn't maybe something that you saw for yourself. So can you share how you made the leap from working in the nonprofit sector to politics?
Yeah, I'm actually really pleased to share that story. Oftentimes people in the public think that politics is for people that come from higher education, that come from families of privilege, etc. And my story actually is an example that all of us deserve to be here, not only women, Indigenous people, but also poor people. Until we have the voices of all people around our tables in politics, then we're not representing our population, in my opinion. So I'll start, a lot of people know I came from the NGO world, but before that, the reason I got into the NGO world is because my home life was kind of tough when I was younger. My mother's still around, so I'm not going to share all of that. But what I will share is that when I was 13, I actually ended up on the streets as a street youth, and spent a number of years actually couch surfing and not even realizing that I was homeless. Because if you can get a bed for the night, you don't think that you're homeless unless you live in a shelter, but that's a fallacy. So after many years of struggling on the streets, I became pregnant and had a couple of children. On my birth of my second child, I decided that my life had to change. I didn't want my children to live the life that I lived. So I went back to university. I only had grade 9. I went back to university and got a degree, ironically, in social work. And I spent 20 years working in the NGO world. And when working in the NGO world, I found that I was always asking for help. At that time, we were getting $30,000 core funding for the homeless shelter for women here in the NWT. And it's like today, it's minus 30 out there. I think it's over minus 30. So it's really cold here. And if you don't have a place to sleep, then you're actually at risk of freezing to death. So I actually ran in my first election, 2015, was to bring homelessness to the forefront. The person that was in the riding that was already elected was well known, a business owner, very well known in the community. And I didn't expect to get elected. I just wanted to make sure people thought about homelessness, but I got elected. And so I didn't really know what I was doing. The first thing I asked is, what's my job description? And I was told that you can do anything, you're a minister. I was elected to not only to the Legislative Assembly, but right away to be a minister. And so I spent the first 6 months actually getting slapped on the hand and saying, but you can't do that. You can't do this. So I said, well, why don't you give me a list of things I can't do? But I guess the story I want to share is that, like I said, anyone can be here. Sometimes you bring things to political attention because you of a cause. Everyone should have a cause when they come into politics. I don't like to see politicians come in just because of the sake they want to be a politician. But I always say to people, have a cause, any cause, but make sure you have a cause when you come in. But it is a challenge. It's been a challenge throughout being a woman in politics. But like I said, I made it. I'm a strong advocate for women in leadership, women in politics, but also for people from low income, from all sectors. We have a large amount of people in our assembly that are Indigenous. We now have the first legislative assembly in the history of Canada that has the majority are women. What we don't have is people of other visual color. And we do have a population in the Northwest Territories now that come from other nations. So we need to still diversify. So what I'm saying is put your name forward.
I love that message. And I mean, there's so much to kind of delve into in what you just shared, but I want to particularly pay attention to the fact that, you based on your life experience, you said, that you were, the experience that you bring from being, a young mother, homeless, couch surfing. How often do you find that actually influences when you're at the cabinet table, when you're premier? Like for someone who doesn't think that that kind of life experience is what politics needs, how does that shape your decision making and how you have conversations? Because I think that's something, to your point, that you can be a lawyer and you can be in business and you can do all of those things, and that's seen as more or less by, let's say the patriarchy as the traditional pathway to politics, but that's not actually representative of the majority of the world, of its people. So what is that like for you?
It's huge. Like I said, the best decisions are made. That's why we have cabinets, is to be able to decide decisions, make major decisions for residents, hear every opinion from around the table. When you come from a background that you have a bit of a rougher life, you think that way. It forms who you become as an adult. Although I feel like I'm kind of losing touch. I haven't been as much in the homeless world since I've been elected, but I still go back. I bring fish and I still go back to talk to the women. It's important to me. But it does shape how I think. And one thing I always say is nothing about us without us. So even though I come from that life, I have a life of privilege now. My life is not the same. So it's really important, in my opinion, that we get the voices of the people that are affected. So that's something I really push for. The other thing I really struggle with in my role as premier and being a woman and having a degree in social work and a background in social work is they like to put me in a box, and they think that you only care about social issues. So I when I first became premier, I got a lot of flack from the business community. And it was really important for me to also focus and say, yes, my degree is in social work. I come from that background, but I also have experience in the business world. My father owned a diamond drilling company here in the north, and I spent years, all of the girls, many big family, worked in the office, and the boys worked in the bush, diamond drilling. So it's really important for me to let the audience know that women don't just come with one. We're not all pregnant barefoot in the kitchen. That doesn't fit us. So even though my degree is in social work, my background is also in business, and I am as diverse as any male politician out there.
Mm-hmm. I totally believe it. I'm not sure. It just happened within the last, I think the last day, but there's an interesting video that maybe I'll share with your staff after. There's actually, and I'm sure it'll go viral in certain circles, but there's a clip from a press conference that happened yesterday in New Zealand, where Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is having kind of like a bilateral meeting or tri-delegation with Sanna Marin, the Prime Minister of Finland. And Prime Minister Ardern is asked by a New Zealand reporter, so someone from her own country, a male reporter, Are you having this meeting are you having this meeting because you're the same age and you're both women?
Wow.
And I know, right? And talk about like leaving your jaw on the floor that question is being asked in 2022, and Prime Minister Ardern, rightly pushes back immediately and says, it's interesting that's. I want to ask the question, was that question ever asked of, President Obama and my predecessor who was male, if they were the same age? Of course not. And then, she goes into a very substantial kind of pushback around all of the necessity for greater trade between the two countries, and giving stats and facts. And then Prime Minister Marin says, prime ministers can be women too. I mean, yeah. Do you ever face, or maybe it's not saying do you ever face that, I think minimizes it, but how do you deal when you're on the receiving end of sexist or misogynist questions or experiences as an MLA and as a premier? How do you deal with that?
I try to deal with those issues head on if I can. I mean, if it's, of course, the opportunity has to be there, the right circumstances, the right audience. So if it was something, the media, I might do what I call a soft slap, try to be politically correct. But I do get challenged. I get challenged on my background. I get challenged on my color. I'm Indigenous and my mother's is First Nations, but I take my father's color and I get challenged on that a lot. So I actually will challenge people back. And for example, when I hear how Indigenous is she, or how much of a business background does she have, or how capable is she, etc., I'll put it out there and just tell people, what do I need to prove myself? Yes, do I need to bring all of my cousins that are darker skinned than me to prove I'm Indigenous? Do I need to bring diamond ores to prove that my father was a diamond driller? What do I need to prove myself, and why do I need to prove myself? As you had said, why do women in politics have to prove who they are, that we're deserving enough, and yet men don't? And I've heard horrible stories about men in politics that I haven't heard about women, and yet we get judged very harshly by the public. I did an interview a couple of months ago with another young student, actually, that was doing some work around media. And one of the things that really stuck with me was just telling her that everyone comes from our own cultures. We all have our own belief systems. And so be really careful when we interview people, when we work with people, that recognizing you can't be non-judgmental. People say that, but there's no such thing, in my opinion, my personal opinion. What you have to do is acknowledge your judgments, acknowledge where you came from. And when you're asking questions, be conscious of how that's going to be received by the individual. So, yeah, I mean, the best tactic is to try to address it when it comes. I love the reply from the president because, again, it's putting it back on the public. If we keep working within our own judgments of what Indigenous people look like, what politicians look like, what women look like, then we're not helping the cause. And really, the cause is about being accepting of all people. So.
I love that. And I think, the ecosystem that you live in politically in the Northwest Territories and in the North is one of a consensus government. So even the way that you were elected premier on a secret ballot, challenging other MLAs, and there are, just in case anyone is wondering, there are 19 by my count MLAs total in the Northwest Territories. So the group of people that you work with is pretty small compared to legislatures down here in the South. And I'm guessing you know them pretty well, pretty well. And you all wear a lot of hats in a place where most people, I think that community is different in that you have a more tighter knit populations. So what was that experience like in that election in 2019 when you became premier, after you defeated the other candidates? How do you work with those people after that?
Oh, it's not easy. There are always a lot of hurt feelings when people run for any kind of campaign and they don't win. That's just normal human behavior. But the key within a consensus government means that we're all run as independents. We don't have a party line, which in some ways makes it easier, in some ways makes it harder. If you have a party line, then people vote for conservative, the liberals, the NDP, the Green parties. They often don't even, the leader isn't even as important as the party's philosophy, although sometimes that's not true. But the reality is that when you're all independents, then you have to work on your own merit. And I actually believe in consensus government in that principle, because you have to prove yourself. You can't be a slacker. You can't be someone that doesn't take it serious. You can't be someone that doesn't listen to the public and expect to get elected here. It does also make it harder when you get out, of course, because like I said, when you're in a consensus government, you don't vote for the party line either. Cabinet sticks together. We have cabinet solidarity, but there's oftentimes in votes that they're on their own as MLAs to vote. So you have to really work at building the relationships, and building relationships with people that are angry, that are hurt because they've lost campaigns is very difficult. But at first, I'm just going to be honest. At first, when I first started, there was one person that was very, very angry with me and challenged me in the house all the time inappropriately, and I lashed back. And looking back on it, it was the wrong thing to do. But it's a natural emotion when somebody attacks you to get defensive. But I always try to learn within Indigenous culture. It's important to keep learning. And one of the leaders, the chief that I respect a lot, came to me one day and he said to me, Premier, he said, the elders don't like when leaders get angry. So I'm going to give you a lesson. And he bent his head and he said the Lord's Prayer. I went to church like a lot of people my generation for years and years, and never really, I said the Lord's Prayer. I know it off the back of my hand, but I never really thought about it. It was just something I just spewed out of my mouth because it was a daily occurrence. But he said the Lord's Prayer, and when he got to the point where he said, forgive those who trespass against me and forgive those who trespass against me, he lifted his head and he looked at me and he extended his hand, and I got it. And so because in Indigenous culture, we don't tell each other what to do. It's your own personal learning that you take from what someone says. So the next time I went into the house and the person was attacking me, as I stood up under my breath, because it wouldn't be appropriate to be heard, I said, forgive those who trespass against me. And it calmed me. It's not, and I'm not saying it's the spiritual thing. It was whatever you take from that, but you need to calm yourself so I stood up and I answered very calmly, and it turned the dynamics. When two people are angry, the audience loves that, and then you have two wicked people. But if you have one person that's really angry and screaming and being inappropriate, and you have the other person that's calm, who wins that argument? So it not only did it calm me and it calmed the audience, but it also helped with the relationship, ironically, because it's hard to fight against somebody who's not being aggressive back. So
Yeah,
learned from an elder.
that's a very beautiful story. And obviously a special moment for you. And I think a lot of people will also take meaning from that, myself included, because although I'm not elected, sometimes I find myself in moments that are very challenging and very frustrating, that make me very angry. And it's sometimes a real struggle to find a way to respond that can also, either publicly or privately, that maintains or stays true to who I am, but also finding a way to navigate the situation to create an awareness that what's going on isn't acceptable. I find that really hard. Do you find that really hard in your daily work?
Absolutely. It's hard for everyone. I mean, like I said, human emotions teaches naturally. I mean, we're instinctual. So if somebody attacks you, want to attack back. But I go back to, I mean, I learned the hard way with that one, but I should have known better, because in my previous life as a social worker, I taught parenting classes forever. And I told parents, and I raised my children, and I'm really proud to say that I never once hit my children. Not because I was like a great parent, just because I worried because of my own background that if I started hitting them, I would beat them and I wouldn't stop. The anger would come out. So often I share with parents and saying like, is it more effective to yell and scream at your child and scare them into what you think is the right thing, or is it better to talk to them? And so it's the same thing. When we let our emotions take precedence, so then we end up as politicians or as parents or as people lashing out back. And then we feel bad after. I mean, I don't know very many people that lash out and then go away saying, I feel great. Usually they're still feeling horrible, angry, or they're feeling resentful, or they're feeling hurt that they actually let themselves get there. So by maintaining your composition, even when things are ugly, actually is a strategy that helps you internally, and it helps you with your own self-esteem and being able to look back, because we should always be looking at what we've done, what we've said, and looking at how we can improve. But it allows you that opportunity to look without being as judgmental on yourself, because you'll always be changing. You'll always be trying to improve yourself. But expressing the anger is or being able to manage your anger, not hide it, not push it away, but to be able to manage it is one of the most effective life skills I think that people can have.
I agree. And as someone who also grew up in, obviously we had different childhoods, but I grew up in a very unstable environment as a child myself. And that wasn't something that anyone ever taught me. And so now trying to teach it to my children is really hard. And so much, I think of it is rooted in, in who we are as adults is how we, how our environments growing up as children. And, that's a daily practice for myself. So it's nice to hear that that you, the Premier of the Northwest Territories, have something, a similar kind of experience. And I think that's more for me on the personal side, sharing. You're being very open and sharing very personal things. And I think that that's what we need more of in politics as well. Because yes, politics is business and it is the economy, but it is also the social side of things. And I think that so much of what's getting lost right now is the personal, the people in the politics, and so much of the vitriol that is shared online in particular really removes the personal. Although it's happening between individuals, it's the lack of understanding that the politician is a person, and the person making the comments is also a person, and the civility and the decency and the understanding and compassion is in my opinion lacking from the political discourse right now. Do you see that in the Northwest Territories as well in social media?
Very much so. I think that people have to realize that politics is about the human condition. It's about humans. It's about people. And people that are in the positions are people themselves. We all come from different backgrounds, different stories. Very few people in society, doesn't matter what your background is, don't come with zero trauma, zero history, zero pain in their lives. So recognizing that is critical. And I find people are really quick to grab things and criticize politicians. So I know that it's difficult for politicians to share our personal stories, because whatever we say will be used against us. It's not like a court of law where it will be used against you. So it's about taking risks. If we keep not sharing our stories, we become those targets, and it becomes okay for the public to lash out at us. Once we can humanize ourselves, even though you put yourself on a ledge and it's very risky, and sometimes I get shots for doing that, it's important, in my opinion, because it's important that people realize that we have emotions too. I don't think there's any politician out there that makes decisions because they're cruel people. We all make decisions. Maya Angelou, I love her quote that says, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And I believe that politicians take that philosophy, whether they use that quote or not. I believe they make decisions based off the best information they have at the time. So I think people need to realize that politicians come because they care. The majority of us, we come and we're trying to do the best, and we won't make everyone happy, but we are trying to do the best for the majority of people.
Yeah. I think that is very true in most circumstances. And it's always my hope. I really push back when people say, like, oh, all politicians, for example, are, crooks, or all politicians are corrupt, or all making broad general statements. And, my personal experience as having been a former political staffer is the exact opposite. I mean, yes, unfortunately, there are people in politics who don't always have the best of intentions. That would be it would be simply ignorant for anyone to assume otherwise. That being said, I personally believe that the overwhelming majority of people in political life are doing it because they believe that they can make things better.
Absolutely.
And politics is seen as one of the least, on that survey. It's like car salesmen and politicians and lawyers. And I actually think it's a really noble and worthy profession, and obviously one where that needs a lot of change, as well as the increased representation of women and marginalized people. But politicians, I think, have a duty to make politics better, so that more high quality people of all walks of life, of all backgrounds, want and can see themselves in that sphere. And I thought it was really interesting. I have my copy of the book, No Second Chances by Kate Graham, who I know that you participated in her podcast and then her book. And I just wanted to pull out a section and read it for everyone. So in these are your words. So there was a workshop for women thinking about going into politics. I took it to learn basic skills, and I thought, yeah, I can do this. I took that to heart. I ran, I campaigned, I won. Now this is my second time. The first time I became a minister, I did it again. And this time I ran and I became the premier. So I can do it. You can do it. We can do it. That's amazing. And you go on in the book to talk about, your partner giving you what you describe as a little push that you needed, and said, yes, you can do this. Go ahead and try. How much of this, the aspect of learning and sharing the things that you've learned with other women in the Northwest Territories is how is that important to you?
It's critical for me. Like I said, I'm the second woman that's been elected as premier in the Northwest Territories, the first Métis woman in Canada. But what I did notice is when I got in, it's naively, again, because I came from the NGO world and I didn't spend all my day on politics. I wasn't a political junkie at that time. I am now, but I wasn't then. So I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing, what the job was. I didn't know very much about the role. I didn't know what was going on nationally. I was more concerned about feeding women and making sure that they had a place to sleep. But when I first got in, I mean, other than asking what my job was, the second question I asked her, I'm not sure if it was first or second, but is when I got elected and I told my staff, I said, I want to meet all the women premiers first, make appointments. And they looked at me and said, you are the only woman premier. So it was a shock to me, in honesty. I mean, I should have known that, in fairness, but I didn't. It was a shock to me that there weren't more women represented in politics. So in the last assembly, I was the Minister of Status of Women. Minister Green, minister now, was an MLA regular member. We were the only two women. And we spent 4 years doing campaign schools right across the NWT. Minister Green and I have different styles when we were doing it, because a lot of women, I feel, don't have the knowledge of what you need to do to get there. It's not that they're not smart enough. There's tools to become elected. And so it was sharing those tools. And we were a great team because she did everything by the book. She did everything right. And she got elected. And I did everything wrong. You name it. They say spend maximum 5 minutes at a door because you got a lot of doors to do. I would stay there for an hour if the person was still talking. I didn't get through. You're supposed to do the rounds of your constituency 3 times. I'm not sure I made every door the first time. But the point is that what we did is we gave the woman the tools. We shared our own experiences. This is what happens and it's good. This is what happens when you mess up, but you can still get there. And so the result of our work, and I do give credit to both of us for that work, is that women came out for women weren't only there, they were all leaders. They came for different reasons. We had the highest amount of women running for mayors across the Northwest Territories. We had women coming out from all over the place running for MLAs. And like I said, it resulted in 10 out of 19 of our MLAs are women. So what it did is it opened the door. It allowed women the safety net to be able to come to a forum and say, these are my fears. This is what I feel I need to know, or I don't even know what I need to know. But the worst thing that I find for women, and I think it might even go for people that are marginalized, is we're our own worst enemies. So if you can get over your own self-doubt, I mean, even the book, when I said, I talked to my partner about it and he said, you're smart enough to do this. Why did I need to have my partner's permission? It's a respectful thing to do, but at the same time, having to need that extra push, it's still a colonistic, a patriarchal kind of opinion. So it's important that women, it was important for me to be able to share the knowledge and to be able to tell women. Julie did great at telling them the tools, the fundraising, how to ask for money, all those kind of things, what to develop, the brochures, the pins, your slogan, whatever you're going to do. But it was also important to be able to hear about all the faults and the mistakes, and you can still get there. So I think that doing those campaign schools is one of the most progressive things that people can do. And I think that it can't stop now. I really worry that we've hit that, we've become the majority, but if we don't keep up the work, we'll slide right backwards. In fact, once we got so many elected in this assembly, one of our male colleagues said, when are you going to do campaign schools for men? So that just shows the mentality out there.
Uh-huh.
But I do think that campaign schools for all kinds of people, and men included, are really critical so that the general population learns what is politics. It should not only be for rich people, for people that are well educated. It should be for all of us.
Yeah. I didn't grow up in a political family. We never talked about politics. There were frankly, much more, there were harder things going on than talking about, who's getting elected and what's going on in political spheres. And so people who don't grow up in that environment definitely need to hear that message. Because I think those are the voices that are needed now more than ever. In a it's not post, we're in a current COVID, current pandemic, post, trucker convoy, in a world, where Donald Trump is running for election again in the States, and our own Canadian political system is seeing its own fair amount of turmoil, specifically here where I live in Alberta. I think it's really easy to kind of feel like to give up. And sometimes I even feel like, I just can't do anymore. I'm frustrated. I'm so angry. I'm so upset. I just want to stop. And I definitely have those moments. And then, I'll try to rest a little bit or refocus or reframe things. And then, you have to start again. That's the to your point, the work doesn't stop. Because your colleague said, when will there be a campaign for school for men? It just like the reporter that asked the question to Santa Marin and Jacinda Ardern, the world isn't right yet. And by right, I mean equal, equitable, fair. Yeah. Right. We're going through some really hard things right now. But I think that your words are incredibly inspirational, and this conversation is definitely one that I will reflect on more and often. I think I really want to thank you for joining me today and taking time out of your busy schedule. And I'm not sure, do you have any last words that you want to share with our audience?
Well, thank you, Sarah, for actually sharing your own stories too, because it's important that we also hear from all of us about, our strengths and the areas that we're not so sure about. The last thing I wanted to share, I guess, is that besides everyone deserves to be at the table, is that just because I'm a woman, because I'm Indigenous, because I'm Métis, it does not mean that we all think the same. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different personalities, but it's critical that if women are 50% of the population, they need to be represented at the table, at the political table. If your jurisdiction has a huge New Canadian population, then you need to have representation at the table. If the table needs to be comprised of all types of people from all different races, backgrounds, social economic status, in order to be able to truly represent the constituents of Canada, then we need to be seen. And the more people that are from marginalized populations, women, people of poverty, people of color, the more of us that run for leadership, the more open it will be for generations to come, for your own children, for your grandchildren as they come. And I know it's frustrating with what's going on in Canada and around the world. It's scary for all of us. But we can't give up the fight because we're doing it for ourselves, but we're doing it for generations to come. And when you give up, then you've given up on generations, and that's not okay. So the life is tough. But when you fall down, story my mother taught me, when you fall down and your knees are hurt, you stand back up, you scrape off your knees, you suck back those tears, and you keep walking forward, because that's how change happens.
Well, thank you again for joining me today. I'm sure that everyone who listens to this will take a lot from this conversation. So thank you again, Premier Cochrane, and hopefully one day, if I'm ever in the Northwest Territories, maybe you'll see me wandering around the legislatures or out by the lake, but I'll probably won't be there in the winter. Although you're at about -30 today, you said, and I think we're around -20 today, and it's currently snowing here in Calgary. So I might come in the summer.
If you come up, get a hold of me. We're a very small population and very personable, so I'd love to take you out for dinner.
Oh, well, that would be very lovely. That would be amazing. So thank you again. All the best with your probably very busy workday. And I look forward to seeing everything that you do.
Yes, and thank you for the work you do. It's critical. It's people like you that actually promote more women, more people to actually run. And so don't give up on your work. It's part of the solution.
Thank you. That's very, I need to hear that sometimes. So thank you for saying that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. All the best.
You too. Bye-bye.